About 5 years ago, I lived downtown in a major city in the US. I have always been a night person, so I would often find myself bored after my roommate, who was decidedly not a night person, went to sleep to pass the time. I used to go for long walks and spend the time thinking. I spent 4 years like that, walking alone at night, and never once had a reason to feel afraid. I always used to joke with my roommate that even the drug dealers in the city were polite. But all of that changed in just a few minutes of one evening. It was a Wednesday, somewhere between 1 and 2 in the morning, and I was walking near a police patrol park, quite a ways from my apartment. It was a quiet night. It was a quiet night, even for a weeknight, with very little traffic and almost no one on foot. The park, as it was most nights, was completely empty. I turned down a short side street in order to loop back to my apartment when I first noticed him. At the far end of the street, on my side, was the silhouette of a man dancing. It was a strange dance, similar to a waltz, but he finished each box with an odd forward stride. I guess you could say he was dance, walking headed straight for me. Deciding he was probably drunk, I stepped as close as I could to the road to give him the majority of the sidewalk to pass me by. The closer he got, the more I realized how gracefully he was moving. He was very tall and lanky and wearing an old suit. He danced closer still until I could make out his face. His eyes were open wide and wild, head tilted back slightly, looking off at the sky. His mouth was formed in a painfully wide cartoon of a smile. Between the eyes and the smile, I decided to cross the street before he danced any closer. I took my eyes off of him to cross the empty street. As I reached the other side, I glanced back, and then stopped dead in my tracks. He had stopped dancing and was standing with one foot in the street, perfectly parallel to me. He was facing me, but still looking skyward, smile still wide on his lips. I was completely and utterly unnerved by this. I started walking again, but kept my eyes on the man. He didn't move. Once I had put about half a block between us, I turned away from him for a moment to watch the sidewalk in front of me. The street and sidewalk ahead of me were completely empty. Still unnerved, I looked back to where he had been standing to find him gone. For the briefest of moments, I felt relieved, until I noticed him. He had crossed the street and was now slightly crouched down. I couldn't tell for sure, due to the distance and the shadows, but I was certain he was facing me. I had looked away from him for no more than 10 seconds, so it was clear that he had moved fast. I was so shocked that I stood there for some time, staring at him, and then he started moving toward me again. He took giant, exaggerated, tiptoed steps, as if he were a cartoon character sneaking up on someone, except he was moving very, very quickly. I'd like to say at this point, I ran away or pulled out my pepper spray or my cell phone or anything at all. But I didn't. I just stood there, completely frozen as the smiling man crept toward me. And then he stopped again, about a car length away from me. Still smiling, his smile still looking to the sky. When I finally found my voice, I blurted out the first thing that came to mind. What I meant to ask was, "What the fuck do you want?" in an angry, commanding tone. What came out was a whimper. What the fuck? Regardless of whether or not humans can smell fear, they can certainly hear it. I heard it in my own voice, and that only made me more afraid. But he didn't react to it at all. He just stood there, smiling. And then, after what felt like forever, he turned around, very slowly, and started dance, walking away. Just like that, not wanting to turn my back to him again. I just watched him go until he was far enough away to almost be out of sight. And then I realized something. He wasn't moving away anymore, nor was he dancing. I watched in horror as the distant shape of him grew larger and larger. He was coming back my way, and this time he was running. I ran too. I ran until I was off of the side road and back onto a better lit road with sparse traffic. Looking behind me then, he was nowhere to be found. The rest of the way home, I kept glancing over my shoulder, always expecting to see his stupid smile, but he was never there. I lived in that city for 6 months after that night, and I never went out for another walk. There was something about his face that always haunted me. He didn't look drunk. He didn't look high. He looked completely and utterly insane, and that's a very, very scary thing to see. When I was a kid, I stayed the night at a friend's house. I had been there many times before, but I had never stayed the night there. His mom was a heavy smoker, and his dad drank a lot of beer. Besides that, they were the perfect family. So my buddies and I stayed up late, eating junk food, drinking soda, and playing video games. Around 2 we all decided to go to sleep. I woke up to the sound of a crash, like someone had knocked over the good china. I tried to wake up my friends, but they wouldn't move. So I crept up the stairs alone in the dark. When I got to the top step, I saw something had tipped over onto the dining room table. As I got closer, I could barely make out 2 figures. One was my friend's dad, his head trapped between what had fallen and the table. The other was just a shadow, its head twisted in my direction and screeched. I just stood there, terrified. The walls began to tremble, almost to the sound of its scream. Finally, I screamed. "Go away." I felt something shove me backwards and I flew through walls and the ground until I hit the floor of the basement. I didn't know what happened. I figured it was a bad dream and fell asleep again. When I awoke the next morning, I was really itchy. It was also really hot. It was the summer, so it was not unusual. But I felt like I wasn't around my friends. I got out of my sleeping bag and looked around. Nothing looked the same. I yelled for my friends and the adults, but got no response. I walked around, crying for what felt like hours, until I started to hear voices underneath me. I heard them calling my name. I couldn't tell who it was at the time, so I was silent. After a few minutes, I heard my mom. She was praying for me to come home. I heard her crying, and I called out to her. She stopped so abruptly I almost didn't notice, until she started screaming for my dad. After a few minutes of me crying and her consoling me, they found me in the attic. From what I could gather, I had apparently disappeared from my friend's house in the middle of the night 4 days prior. They thought I had been kidnapped, as my friends' families checked out. Police had been looking for me. Family, friends, almost the whole town. All the while I was in the attic. So everyone understands, there was not an entryway to the attic in the house. If you wanted to get in there, you had to go through a window on the side of the house. You would need a 20-foot ladder, plus powered tools, but I was around 10. The only other way was to break through the ceiling inside the house. I was taken to the hospital, interviewed by police and psychiatrists, and they all couldn't explain what happened. I had 5 long scratches down my back, all parallel and the same length and width, marks along my arms and legs, and the white of one of my eyes was red for a month. My eyes are normally blue, but one was red and blue. I didn't show signs of torture or psychological distress. It was like I teleported there. I was extremely hungry and obviously confused, but nobody knows what happened or how. It's been many years now, and to this day, nobody has any clue what happened.